Hello, this is One Great Earth. My name is Dan. Thank you for joining me here. Today we'll be talking about Doomsday global seed vaults. There are three in particular that we'll be discussing. But first, get this out of the way. If you haven't already, please like the stream, subscribe to the channel. It helps me out immensely and keeps me motivated in doing these videos and related climate content. As well, I have a Patreon now, since Google is not going to monetize my channel due to shocking content, which when I shared what videos were being hit with other people, it was kind of surprising that it was shocking. I tried appealing, but I can only appeal as I have an official business with this channel. I created this channel 10 years ago, and I didn't remember selecting an organization instead of individual. YouTube can change the account type on my channel, but they said they won't, and they're going to keep my ads account suspended, which ebb and flows. But this Patreon should be a lot easier to keep content flowing. That people will be able to just check the Patreon instead of, my YouTube whenever there's updates. That might be a bit better of a driver to the channel if people can find my Patreon through other Patreon channels or by searching through posts. But Patreon is new to me as a creator, and so far it seems to be pretty easy going. I like it. Prefer this rather than trying to go through ads with YouTube or Twitch. This way that people can still subscribe for free if they would like, and that still matters. It still does. There's also a $5 tier, and the people that are $5 tier, I will read off their names at the end of every stream. I stream quite often, so me saying that now, that could be a lot. I can be saying the names quite often. So I can get out probably like once a day, and maybe in a bonus stream. But I don't know how long I can keep this up. I'm being for real. It is a lot to keep up on this channel, the way that I want this energy to be handled, the way I want to be heard, and how quickly or delicately I try to speak. We're going to discuss one of the first Doomsday seed vaults. This is in Wakehurst, near London, England, United Kingdom. Noah's Ark. The UK seed bank saving the future of wild plants. The Millennium seed bank in Wakehurst stores 2.4 billion seeds as insurance against global plant extinction. Our hope is that one day we do not need to exist, Dr. John Dickey says. His breath-forming clouds of condensation and the frigid temperatures of a bomb and flood-proof underground vault lined with seeds of carefully cataloged jars and vials containing billions of seeds. This is the Millennium Seed Bank, MSB, at the Royal Kew Gardens in Wakehurst, southern England, home to the largest seed conservation project, a Noah's Ark for plants that is an insurance policy, a hedge against these species becoming extinct so they can be reestablished in the future. Dickey, senior research leader in seed and laboratory-based collections, tells EPA. Unlike other similar conservation projects, such as the Global Seed Vault on Spitsbergen in Norway, which focuses on agricultural crops, the MSB is geared towards protecting wild species whose very survival is threatened. The purpose is the long-term conservation of plant species for many tens, if not hundreds of years. By drying and cooling seeds of flowering plants, they can have extended lives, Dickey says. With 98,000 collections of 40,000 different plant species from 190 countries, it is the largest plant conservation project in the world. We have collections from almost all of the 35 biodiversity hotspots regions with significant levels of biodiversity that are threatened by humans in the world, Dickey says. According to US-based NGO Conservation International, these hotspots have a high percentage of plant life found nowhere else on the planet, and therefore irreplaceable. Any small postal parcel that believes the importance of what's inside. Seeds are sent to Kew Gardens from the four corners of the globe before they are cleaned and processed in the lab to protect them from disease and facilitate storage. In which seeds are weighed ahead of storage. The bank of 2.4 billion seeds are acting as an insurance policy to stop the world's plant species from becoming extinct. Seeds are x-rayed for viability. We separate the wheat from the chaff, Dickey says, before the seeds are tested, re-dried, packaged, and stored at -20°C. Or -4°F. To ensure the collection remains viable, a subsample of seeds are germinated in laboratories every 10 years, which both test their long-term viability and inform future users of the best conditions to germinate the seeds. But the team at Kew is not only concerned about conserving and protecting species for the future, it also provides seeds to researchers, breeders, and conservationists, which they can then multiply and establish in the field, as the aim in both long-term survival and enabling current use. A seed casing is dissected ahead of storage. Might be an example of a legume pod. One of the ways the banks can do that is by convincing local communities to collect their seeds directly from the wild to work with conservation projects like Kew Gardens. If we get our collections used and we engage those local communities, we can bring those wild species into cultivation and they can make a living out of them, Dickey says, calling the arrangement a win-win. That would also mean that wild plant populations are preserved. While the hope is that there would be no need for seed banks in time because the environmental change and biodiversity loss has been stabilized and reversed, Dickey acknowledges that that scenario is still a while away. There is life in front of seed banks for now. See if I can search for that real quick. If not, I'll do it in Google. And that's where that is. In southeast England. Pretty wild. It's the largest in the world, and it cultivates for wild plants. Keeps them going, even though they might disappear in the wild. We still have them somewhere safe, somewhere qualified to retain and keep all these seeds. It's amazing. We have collections from almost 35 biodiversity hotspots. I wonder how many of the biodiversity hotspots as they collect in Massey eventually become extinct in the wild. And how many times they have to deal with that, knowing that. This plant, like this plant, went extinct in the wild, but we have it in a seed bank. Do we use the seeds to try to recultivate it in the wild? In the same area? Is the same area able to retain these once native species that are feared to go extinct in the wild? Our next one is Ukraine's. This is the National Gene Bank of Plants of Ukraine. I believe they are mostly cultivating and keeping seeds for farmland. This is especially concerning due to the amount of biodiversity that's in the seed vault and the war that's happening in Ukraine, the illegal invasion from the Russian army into Ukraine, the illegal annexation of Crimea. Victory is Ukraine, Slava Ukrainian. It is especially of note, great importance, that this seed vault in Ukraine was already struck once by the Russians. There is no military around here. It is a seed vault, worldwide known. There's no military. Just like the 95% of the time rockets and bombs hit civilian infrastructure, civilians themselves, and not military without being anywhere around. These are precise hits, precision weapons. They don't just hit something 80 kilometers away out of the way and say, hey, that wasn't military, that was nothing. What do we got over there? Nothing? So you have one country bent on causing extinction, threatening nuclear war, confiscating and hijacking nuclear power plants. What are they doing? They had plans. Russians had plans. They had plans to take Ukraine. They had plans to invade Japan, or at least start a war in Japan, because Japan did not have defense spending since World War II. And as a result of this news coming out, Japan is increasing its defense spending for the first time since World War II. It's big news. But Ukraine must hold off Russia. Russia must leave Ukraine and give up all land that they have annexed and attempted to confiscate. Because it's not just the land, it's the people that are finding themselves under Russian law, Russian rule, Russian culture. No Ukrainian culture that's being wiped out. Why we're talking about this seed bank here. Extinction can happen to anything on this planet. Anything. Alaskan Alaskan snow crabs, passenger pigeons, Michael Gross banana, the old banana that the older generation always talks about being better than the new Cavendish banana. There's a lot of plant species that are cultivated carefully in monocrop areas for years without a problem. The problem comes when the seeds. When you have, well, let's just call them freak plants. When you have freak plants that are so bioengineered to the point that their seeds are more difficult to find. Because if I recall correctly, Cavendish bananas seeds are incredibly Cavendish bananas, if I recall correctly, you get one seed maybe every 12,000 bananas. You can see how this becomes a problem when monocrop culturing begins to show signs of can't remember the term right now, I apologize. Diminishing returns. Also, you have disease that wiped out the original bananas 100 years ago. The same diseases that hit these plants can do the same, because it's more difficult to cultivate them even in the monocrop due to the seeds being so difficult to find. I digress. Thank you for listening. In underground vaults near Ukraine's battlefields, the genetic code of nearly 2,000 crops is in danger of being permanently destroyed. That's the other difference of this seed bank vault, is it has farm crops, farmland crops, stuff you would grow to eat. The risk came into sharp focus earlier this month when a research facility near Ukraine's national seed bank was damaged, according to Crop Trust, a nonprofit organization set up by the United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization. The facility and Ukraine's seed bank are both based in Kharkiv, northeastern Ukraine, which has come under intense bombing from Russian forces. Reuters could not determine the cause of the damage, and Crop Trust said only that the research facility had been hit, but declined to give further detail, citing security reasons. It was a narrow escape. Only 4% of the seeds in Ukraine's store, the 10th largest of its kind in the world, has been backed up. Seed banks are kind of a life insurance for mankind. They provide the raw materials for breeding new plant varieties, resistance to drought, new pests, new diseases, and higher temperatures, Stefan Schmitz, the executive director of Crop Trust, told Reuters. It would be a tragic loss if Ukraine's seed bank were destroyed. The director of the seed bank could not be reached. Ukraine's Academy of Science declined to comment, and Russia's defense ministry did not immediately reply to request for comment on the damage. Researchers rely on the diverse genetic material that seed banks store to breed plants that can withstand climate change or disease. They have been increasingly vital to ensuring enough food is produced each season to feed 7.9 billion people as the world's weather becomes more extreme. At the same time, the war between Russia and Ukraine, the world's third and fourth largest grain exporters respectively, has added to food price inflation and the danger of food scarcity, with protests breaking out in developing countries that normally benefit from Ukraine's grain. Syria saved by Arctic backup. The war in Syria The war in Syria has provided a lesson in the importance of backing up seeds using Svalbard Global Seed Vault in Norway, the world's largest and most important seed backup or duplication facility. In 2015, the Svalbard Vault was able to send replacement samples of wheat, barley, and grasses suited to dry regions to researchers in Lebanon after a seed bank near the Syrian city of Aleppo was destroyed. Aleppo is a war zone, hell on earth. In total, Svalbard preserves more than 1 million seed samples in a vault built in the Arctic mountainside. These include 4% of Ukraine's top 150,000 seeds, representing more than 1,800 crops. The German-based Crop Trust, which is the only international organization whose sole purpose is to safeguard crop diversity, has made funds available to Ukraine to copy seeds, but security and logistics issues linked to war and natural cycles means it's difficult to speed up the process. Schmitz estimate that at best, about 10% of Ukraine's seeds can be backed up within a year, because they need to be planted, grown, harvested at the right time before the duplicates can be extracted and sent to Svalbard. An emergency measure would be to forego duplication and just ship the collection to Svalbard, but Schmidt says this might not be feasible in wartime. The Syrian seeds were from the Fertile Crescent, the region where settling farming is believed to have emerged. And Ukraine also has a central place in agriculture. Agriculture in Ukraine has roots back in prehistoric times. Grief Aline Evgen, a senior advisor at the Norwegian Ministry of Agriculture and Food, said adding many of the country's seeds were unique. Evgen said the ministry is ready to help Ukraine duplicate and store all its seeds at Svalbard, but has yet to receive a request from Ukrainian authorities. There was a research facility in May 2022 in Ukraine that was damaged by Russian forces. Let's see. This is Newsweek. Fact check. Did Russia destroy one of the world's seed banks, one of the world's major seed banks in Ukraine? Let's just skip down to the bottom. Half true. While some seed samples have indeed been destroyed by Russian shelling of a research facility, the main gene bank collection appears to still be intact, according to several experts in the industry and local authorities. That's good news, but it's still in a war zone. It's different when you collect from a war zone, when you are picking up cultivated seeds from around the wild, compared to these crops Ukraine grows and have grown. And if this seed bank goes away, that is a huge aspect of Ukrainian culture that would be wiped off the face of the planet, considering that 4% is only cloned as a backup right now. And due to the war, they're not able to do much else. Russia needs to leave Ukraine. They need to leave. This anger can only fuel Ukraine's fight against Russian rule, Russian terror. And this facility came close to being targeted, if not just a research facility that was hit. But there's no telling what was in that research facility. If they were in the process of growing plants, if they were extracting, they were in the process of extracting. No fatalities were reported in that hit at the research facility in 2022 in May, or at least late April, early May. Put it to. Alright, now this is the big one. Inside the Doomsday Vault, these scientists are fighting civil war and climate change to feed a hungry globe. A team of scientists on the front lines of climate change is helping nature heal itself. But as war rages around them, it's making their efforts to feed an increasingly hungry globe that much harder. The gray triangular concrete juts into the air. Its sharp lines contrast a landscape where it's hard to differentiate between the frozen surface and a clear, endless sky. Sitting on Svalbard, in the Norwegian archipelago, the global seed vault is as far north as a scheduled flight will take you. It makes it remote but still accessible. And here we have this image of the entrance. reinforced operational area, and the seed vaults in the back, underneath the mountain. Or is it a mountain? Continue. Dubbed a Doomsday Vault, is essentially a Noah's Ark for crops, an international backup to preserve humanity. Double doors stand at the end of a gangplank that takes people deep inside permafrost. From here, it's just 120 meters into the frozen mountain to reach the foundations of global food supplies. The chambers, chilled to minus 18 degrees Celsius, house floor-to-ceiling metal shelving dotted with colored hard plastic boxes. Inside are sealed, custom-made 3-ply foil packages that safely store 1.2 million seed samples from every country on Earth. While a select few have entered the vaults to deliver seeds, just one person has ever felt the weight of taking seeds out. Scientist fleeing war. I knew how important it was to complete my mission, says Athanasius Svelicus, an agricultural researcher, was sent to Svalbard in 2015 on behalf of the International Center for Agricultural Research in the Dry Areas, ICARDA, after the Civil War forced his organization to leave Syria. ICARDA's mission is to reduce poverty and enhance food, water, and nutritional security in the face of global challenges. Its focus is on the developing world, where it hopes its research can help bolster crop yields, farmer incomes, and ensure people have access to food where they live. While when Civilicus joined ICARDA in late 2012, the organization had fled its base 30 kilometers south of Aleppo, again, Aleppo, Syria, the war zone. Dissatisfaction with President Bashir al-Assad had prompted large pro-democracy rallies and protests across Syria, fueled in part by the Arab Spring uprising. Government crackdowns met resistance, and soon civil war engulfed the country. According to the United Nations, Syria's wheat production in 2021 was about a quarter of its average before the civil war. After years of drought, ICARDA has been working with local farmers to expand Syria's wheat production. You can see how badly damaged these systems are. This scientist, along with hundreds of thousands of civilians caught up in the civil war, were forced to flee. These photos show the damage after a Syrian Air Force strike hit a wheat factory in Ras Al Ain, near the border with Turkey in November 2012. We have this nice premise that we had developed in Syria, says Ahmed Amri. Svalbard's predecessor, who for many years was the head of ICARDA's Genetic Resources Unit. Amri and his team fled to Tunisia, but as the war continued to rage, it quickly became clear that returning to Syria wasn't going to be an option. It wasn't just their homes they left behind. The seeds they spent decades collecting were now stranded in a war zone. In this image here, an ICARDA scientist preparing seeds at the gene bank in Tel Hadja, Syria, before the organization fled the country in 2012. So much work. Scientists at the gene bank in Tel Hadja, Syria, before ICARDA fled the country in 2012. Archival photographs show Icarta scientists working in Syria before the war. With no way to reach them and years of research all but lost, Icarta was forced to resort to its backups. Prior to the war, Icarta had protected much of its work by storing copies and gene banks scattered around the world. About 83% of the full Syrian collection was safely locked up in the Svalbard vault. It would be up to Svalbard to retrieve them. Having set up a replacement gene banks in Lebanon and Morocco, he found himself on a plane headed north, on a first-of-its-kind mission to recollect the seeds Icarta had lost. Working inside Svalbard was very difficult. I couldn't feel my fingertips after some time, he says with a grin. Arne Bragason from Nordgen, helping Svalbard retrieve seeds from the global seed vault at Svalbard. The mission in 2015 was the first time anyone had entered the vault to make a withdrawal. Wow. Svalbard remembers the feeling to this day. It would be weeks before feeling return to Svalbard's fingers, but a different feeling would linger, one of pride knowing he was the only one privileged to enter this Doomsday vault. It was amazing to see in front of your eyes the efforts of the people in Syria who were pioneering and duplicating the seeds here in Svalbard. Delicate mission. It's not as simple as hopping to Svalbard, collecting seeds, defrosting them, growing them in a field, and harvesting more seeds to back up your supplies. You can't regrow a whole collection of hundreds of thousands of seeds in a year. So when Svalbard returned with his precious cargo, Icarta began what would become a decade of work. Over years, crops were grown with precision and in conditions closely monitored for pests and diseases. Plant researcher Anna Backhouse, a postdoctoral fellow at Icarta, describes gene banks as hoarders that allow nature to help nature. She spends her days identifying which of the thousands of species stored in the gene bank can be used to help produce modern crops that are more susceptible to a hotter, drier climate. In this image, Anna Backhouse is working on producing modern crops that can withstand hotter, drier climates. It's work that can take years, introducing new traits into plants that both allow them to better tolerate harsher conditions while still yielding crops that can be farmed. The whole idea is that we want crops that are resilient, that help us reduce the amount of pesticides we're using, that help us to reduce the amount of water we're wasting, that helps us feed a growing human population, she says. And all that we can do through the magical powers of nature itself. Michael Baum's office at Icarta is within eyesight of the gene bank that Backhouse is working in. He was among those who had to flee Syria. Syria used to be a very stable country, and in 2011 and 2012 the protests started. Icarta's Deputy Director General for Research says. Baum says even in Morocco, where he lives now, he is reminded how fragile stability can be. The UN estimates about 17% of Morocco's population is living in poverty, or considered vulnerable to multidimensional poverty. The Mediterranean coastal enclave at the tip of North Africa is also highly vulnerable to climate change, with increasingly frequent and intense droughts posing an immediate threat to its agricultural sector. Livelihoods and scientific research are at risk as Moroccan farmers contend with drought-stricken lands. Droughts in recent years have forced many to rely on government handouts of fodder. The centuries-old oases have been a trademark of Morocco are under threat from climate change. The country's economic stability, this picture here is wild. The country's economic stability has been further disrupted by the global shockwaves of the Russia-Ukraine war. So I'm worried about the situation in Morocco, Baum says. Countries that seem very stable in a short period of time can turn around and develop problems we've seen in some of the thriving countries in this part of the world. Lessons from Ukraine. Baum is reflecting on the precarious nature of his work as the world marks the second anniversary of the Russian-Ukraine war. Prior to 2022, those two countries were dubbed the world's breadbasket, accounting for around a third of global exports and 12% of the calories traded globally. Ukraine contributed to 6% of global wheat exports, much of which went to parts of Africa and Southeast Asia. Egypt alone imported about half of the Ukrainian wheat exported to Africa. That was until Russia invaded. The early days of the war saw 20 million tons of Ukrainian crops ready for export held up in ports. With time, paddocks would be destroyed and one of the busiest ocean passages would become a treacherous voyage. The Black Sea littered with mines. With no clear path to get crops out of Ukraine, it sparked fears that food insecure and poor nations would deteriorate further. Even countries that don't import grain from Ukraine were hit, with prices rising sharply. Temporary deals between the warring nations, brokered by third parties to allow the flow of Ukrainian crops to markets, fell apart as the conflict dragged into its second year. If there is anything this war has proved time and time again, it's how creativity can so often counter military might, and so it was with this grain. Before the invasion of Ukraine, crops would have set sail from Ukrainian port. Cities like Odessa headed across the Black Sea to the Bosphorus Strait, then into the Mediterranean Sea and out to global markets. Now, if a crop is traveling by sea, the ship hugs the coastline past Romania and Bulgaria, through the Bosphorus Strait and beyond. According to the World Bank, wheat shipments can be adjusted rapidly because the crop typically travels on dry charter vessels that set sail on demand rather than set schedules. You can see this where they have to avoid all of the mines and warships in the Black Sea to be able to make it out of the strait into a very, 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 very treacherous, dangerous migration route here. Migrants that come from Turkey. I digress. Alternatively, so-called solidarity lines were established with European support to allow Ukrainian grain to head to international markets via land. These lanes are now responsible for about 60% of the country's exports and have allowed Ukraine to sell grain more easily into Europe. A controversial move in neighboring countries where farmers have been annoyed at the competition in their domestic markets. European Commission figures show that between May 2022 and January this year, the solidarity lines allowed Ukraine to export 122 million tons of goods, while also importing 45 million tons of military and humanitarian aid, fuel, and other products. Despite war still raging within its boundaries, Ukraine has managed to stabilize the flow of grain exports, and in January saw exports at levels not seen since the war. Tackling climate challenges. The ripples of this war extended far beyond the bounds of wheat. Price hikes flowed through to global markets, sending shockwaves around the world and underlining the risk of an over-reliance on foreign markets. For some African countries, it reinforced the need for agricultural research to help them achieve greater levels of self-sufficiency. But in a changing climate, achieving that goal is not as simple as growing more crops. The availability of land, vulnerability to extreme weather events, and access to technology are just some of the factors at play. While wealthier nations have the resources to tackle these challenges, many in this part of the world do not. The big issue is climate, which we are not sufficiently addressing. Eliza Manningham Buller, the former head of the UK domestic spy agency MI5, recently said of the biggest issues the world is facing beyond Russia's invasion. It has implications for the future of our grandchildren, its implications for food security, for water security, for wars over both, and migration on a scale which would say we've seen nothing yet. If large parts of the world become unlivable, those who can move will do so. It's a sentiment shared by Tadessa Tegu, a principal scientist at Arcata who oversees spring-bred wheat breeding programs. He says he lives on the front line of climate change. I am a living example for those who climate change deniers because I have seen it. The disease development, the drought, and heat increases, he says. This is him helping out crops and sustain a changing climate and help feed a growing global population. Dagu, who was among those who fled Aleppo, works closely with Australian farmers and the Grain Research and Development Corporation. In return, Australian imports the wheat and barley lines he and Arcata helped develop, which plant breeders turn into crops grown on farms across the country. His goal is to help produce crops that can sustain a changing climate and help feeding a growing global population, even in faraway wealthy countries like Australia. But that work becomes harder and harder each year. When I arrived here in 2012 from Syria, the station was the optimum environment of Morocco. This environment used to have more than 500 millimeters of rain on average, he says, looking over his research fields, about an hour for about. Starting from 2019, the amount of rainfall has decreased, the temperature increased, and by 2023, we had 180 millimeters of rain. But this year, we received not more than 20 millimeters up to January. This is not good enough for planting. Veteran legume breeder and pest management expert Saeed Ahmed Kamal is tasked with finding solutions in cases where the gene bank might not have the answer. Developing high-yielding and disease-resistant food legumes. He says climate change is bringing with it new insects and diseases, while previously minor pests are now proving more threatening to crop yields. Less rain and lower yields mean pests that might have attacked the leaves will be less prevalent, while those that attack the roots becoming more pressing. Last year, Dago was able to test drought-tolerant crops with the small amount of rain that had fallen. This year, he's facing a bleak outlook and thinks it will make efforts to tackle self-sufficiency that much harder. Africa, he says, imports 55 million tons of wheat, costing tens of billions of dollars each year. Morocco, Algeria, and Nigeria each import around 5 million tons. It's double that in Egypt. Because of this Russia-Ukraine crisis, even if you have the money, you don't have the place to buy it, he says. So because of this, most of the countries wanted to be wheat self-sufficient to grow locally. But with the challenge of climate change, I am not sure that is going to be achieved. How that is going to be achieved. Dagu says, however, see green shoots in other parts of Africa. Ethiopia used to import around 2 million tons of wheat, but last year, after embracing irrigated wheat production, it produced 12 million tons, making it the largest wheat producer in Africa. Nigeria is looking to develop a similar system that uses both rain and irrigation to grow wheat in a bid to reduce their wheat imports by 50%. It's a policy, Dagu says, that only work in the wealthier African countries. Despite the challenges, he remained optimistic that science and the global sharing of knowledge and technology can help tackle global hunger. So if we keep working, developing such high-yielding, climate-resistant technologies, increase the availability of food in every country, it will contribute for peace and stability, he says. That is my wish. He says this as the war rages in the Middle East. He's conscious that there is little he can do to change it, but he knows all too well that it risks making an already hungry world hungrier. The looming threat. To Tegu's east, Bab el Mandeb has been living up to its name in recent months. An Arabic name, it translates to the Gate of Grief or the Gate of Tears, depending on the interpretation. Stretching around 30 kilometers, the gate separates Yemen and the Middle East from the Horn of Africa, neatly dividing Asia to the east and Africa to the west. It also serves as the opening to the Red Sea, the crucial trade route that connects with the even narrower Suez Canal to the north. Until late last year, tens of thousands of ships would pass through here annually, accounting for 12% of global trade. But the splinters of another war, this time in Gaza, threw this channel into chaos. On November 19th, Houthi rebels landed a helicopter on the British-owned Galaxy Leader. The ship had been traveling through the Red Sea from Turkey to India. The Houthis, an Iranian-backed group aligned with Hamas and Lebanon's Hezbollah under the Axis of Resistance, say they have targeted Israeli-linked vessels in retaliation against the war in Gaza. Other ships do. The Yemen Conflict Observatory estimates the Houthis have targeted almost 80 ships in the Red Sea and Gulf of Aden since the end of last year, often using Bab el-Mandeb as the point to launch missiles and drones as ships enter the strait. So worried about the scale of this disruption, the United States has led a global military task force, which Australia has joined with personnel, not warships, to try and counter the attacks. Amid the strife, ships have rerouted, opting for a longer journey that allows them to avoid the Red Sea. The Black Grain journey to Asia via the Suez Canal. Here's Ukraine, Suez Canal, Red Sea, Strait. Go around. In earlier times, it would have taken just 8 days for a ship to sail from Ukraine to the Horn of Africa, sailing through the Suez Canal and the Red Sea. A map showing the grain journey from the Black Sea to Asia without going through the Suez Canal. You have to go through the Mediterranean, you have to go through everything, all around the Atlantic and South Atlantic into the Indian Ocean. It is treacherous, arduous, and a lot more planning needs to be done to be able to do this. A lot more routes need to be okayed. You can't just randomly sell a huge ship just along the coastline. Can you? Like, these are territorial waters. You would have to have permission to sail in these waters, I imagine. Now it's an extra 30 days to traverse down Africa's west coast around the Cape of Good Hope and then back up the African east coast. A trip between the east coast of the United States and India is roughly doubled if you need to bypass the Red Sea. The Red Sea is also a crucial passage for getting Ukraine's grain to Asia, with 30% of its exports heading to China. It's a worrying sight for Michael Baum, who fears ships bypassing the Red Sea and, more importantly, the Suez Canal could have implications not just for Egypt, but the broader region. If the Red Sea is considered narrow, the Suez is a hair width by comparison. At 280 meters wide, it's a crucial global shipping artery. Handling around 10% of international shipping, almost 70 ships a day pass through the Suez Canal each day in 2022. The global transport through the Suez Canal is very much reduced, and this is the biggest source of income for Egypt, Baum says. Oh my god, I'm muted. Thank you. I don't know how long I was muted for. Okay, so it wasn't that long. I was like, it was more than 10 minutes. It's only oh yeah, when I took a drink. Thank you, Rain in Africa, for letting me know I was muted. I probably would have went the entire stream muted. Still, thank you very much. So let's see, about looking to the future. Lessons from Ukraine, tackling climate challenges, looming threat. Looking to the future. You only need to look to history to see the consequences of food crises on a mass migration. The food protests that turned into a civil war in Syria first started in Tunisia in December 2010, where they were initially dismissed as bread riots. Baum says that Russia-Ukraine war has exacerbated a problem the globe was already struggling to fix, despite all the efforts scientists are making to combat climate change. Food insecurity is increasing. Over the last 10 years, there are more and more countries that have become food insecure because many countries are fragile and have wars and local conflict, and there are many displaced people, he says. Libya, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Yemen, Sudan. These were all countries with developing economies, which are today ridden by conflicts and problems. And so food insecurity is increasing rather than decreasing. But these threats are nothing new for Baum's team. Lebanon. Jakarta's history is steeped in conflict. From its founding in 1975, civil war in Lebanon led the organization instead to Syria, where the regime offered free land for it to be established. Its headquarters would eventually return to Lebanon with the upheaval of Syria's war. A skeleton crew of local staff stayed when everyone else fled Syria. With time, they would flee too. And while Jakarta might have lost access to its original gene bank, reports suggest the employees with no means but to stay have preserved the facility, even in the face of considerable risk. Rebuilding the genetic stockpiles hasn't been easy, but after years of hard work, Jakarta's goals in Syria have been achieved. That hasn't been the case in Afghanistan, Yemen, and Iraq, where their genetic material has been lost. After the turmoil, the relocations, the conflicts that engulf the world around them, these scientists remain optimistic about their futures. Athanasius Silvakis embodies that as much as the rest. Here is a picture of Athanasius Silvakis holding a packet of seeds at a gene bank in Morocco. He doesn't need those gloves he used in Svalbard today. Where he's standing, there's no chance of frostbite. If anything, there's a chance of catching some sun in the middle of winter. At his feet are green shoots of a bread wheat crop. Back in the 1990s, the then Syrian-based Jakarta gene bank sent duplicate copies of those seeds to Mexico to store them as backup. These seeds were among the 17% of the Syrian collection that never made to Svalbard. That is about to change. Once this crop is harvested, some of the seeds will enter Jakarta's Moroccan gene bank, some will go back to Mexico, and others will be Svalbard bound. It will mark a major milestone for Jakarta, with its collection set to be fully duplicated in Norway's frozen vault. The moment isn't lost on Silvakis. We came here without seeds, without infrastructure, Silvakis says. but we have managed as Arcarda in a few years to have wonderful infrastructure, and we're about to reconstitute the whole collection, and the feeling is amazing. The significance of fully duplicating Arcarda's collection in Svalbard isn't lost on Sylvacus. In this image here, these are Sylvacus's hands. These are not Arcarda's seeds. They are the seeds of humanity. They are the seeds that farmers have entrusted to us and will serve all of humanity. Brilliant work being done around the world as efforts to send more samples, more seeds to these areas of great importance of seed vaults. The only thing, though, that I can think of is this image right here, this image. It is being cooled by permafrost. Permafrost thawing is alarming, so will this seed storage vault become useless if it warms up, if global warming heats up these areas? There's no more glaciers, no more ice, no more sea ice, no more lake ice. It's a lot to think about, because how much effort that we just read off goes into, so much effort goes into this process, into these, keeping these seeds safe. If climate change were to cause sea level rise and cause this whole entire area to be underwater and floods the rest of it, you got seawater coming up. That'll eat through anything. It is why Israel is dumping seawater into every hole and crevice that they can find in Gaza. It eats away at everything. So, climate change might exacerbate the safety or the well-being of these vaults. As permafrost chills this one in Norwegia, we lose permafrost, we lose the ability to cool this using nature. And what? These are tough questions to ask. Because you ask somebody that has spent the last 20 years of their life dedicating to collecting samples, monitoring them, growing them, harvesting them, cleaning them, bringing them, and sending them for sample, that all that work would be lost due to sea level rise and permafrost melt. I thank you for joining me for this stream. If you haven't already, please like the stream and subscribe to the channel. It helps me out immensely and keeps me motivated for putting out climate-related videos on YouTube. I thank you very much for joining me. Please take care.